For topic two, we're going to look at percent of increase and then percent of decrease. So you're going to have some situation where some value either increases or decreases over time, and we want to know what percentage of the original value is the increase or the decrease, okay? Now, you can use just formulas to solve these, okay? Or if you still like the amount and the base, if you like to just go that route, the amount is always going to be the value of the, let me scoot. I've got a picture of my face right here. So the amount is always going to be the value of the increase or decrease. And then the base is always going to be the original value. So if you prefer to stick with the amount and the base, you absolutely can here, okay? So what we have is percent of increase is used to determine how much a value has increased over time. And the formula is the percent of increase equals the value of the increase divided by the original amount. And then that's going to give you some decimal. You would then have to convert it to a percent. So sometimes you'll see this formula with a times 100. Okay. Now, percent of decrease is used to determine the value of, wow, let me start that one over. The percent of decrease is used to determine how much a value has decreased over time. So the formula would be the value of the decrease divided by the original value. And then again, you're going to get some decimal that you would have to convert to a percent. So if you want, you can go ahead and just put times 100 and that automatically converts it to its percent form. Okay. In both cases, the decimal result needs to be converted to percent form. So multiplying by 100, that's what this is here and here, okay? Now that's if you use the formula. If you're really comfortable with the percent equation or the percent proportion, you can still use those, okay? So let's look at two examples here. All right, whoops. I'm trying to get everything in one screen here. Let's see. I need to scroll just so. Okay. So example 3 says find each percent of increase or decrease. Write the answer as a percent and include correct units. So that just means kind of like describe your answer. Okay. So when you have a percent of increase or decrease problem, it's going to be fairly obvious because generally speaking, the words percent of increase or percent of decrease will be in the problem. So you're just looking to see what percentage this change represents of the original value, or what percentage of the original value is this increase or decrease. So for part A, it says a town's population increased from 25,200 to 26,460. Find the percent of increase in the town's population. Okay. So let's just say for fun that we do the formula, and then I'll show you maybe the equation method for this one. And then on the next one, we'll do the formula, and then I'll show you maybe the proportion method. So you can see you really do get the same values. Okay. So if we were to do the percent of increase, and if we used the formula, we would get the value of the increase divided by the original value. And then that gives us some decimal that would have to then be converted to a percent. So we can just multiply by 100. So we need to do a tiny little bit of arithmetic. We need to figure out what 26,460 minus 25,200 is. This right here is the value of the increase. Okay, so if we were to subtract here, you can use your calculator. So you need to show us what you're doing on your calculator. So I would want to see this right here written out just like I have it, but then the calculator can be used for the side work. So we would want to take 26,460 and subtract 25,200, and we get 1,260. Okay. Now we need to know what the original value is. Okay. So in this particular instance, we have that a town's population increased from 25,200 to 26,460. So the original value is the 25,200. So my percent of increase is going to be 1,260. That's kind of like our amount, divided by 25,200. That's our base. And then we're going to multiply it by 100. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the actual calculator to show you this one. So depending on the calculator you have, your calculator steps might be different, and that's totally okay. Just ask your instructor how to use your calculator. So for mine, I want to take the 1,260. I'm going to divide it by 25,200. That's going to give me some decimal. And then if I want to convert it to a percent, I can just manually move my decimal to the right twice, or I can multiply by 100 on my calculator and I get 5. So what does that mean? Okay, well, if we go back to the word problem here, we get that the percent of increase is 5%. And what is that 5%? It was a 5% increase in population. And there you have it. Okay. Now, if we wanted to do the amount, the base, and the percent, we could. Okay. So we would say, hey, the amount was the difference in the two values. So it was the actual increase in population. So the 1,260. The base was the original value. So in this case, since we're talking about population, it would have been the original population before the increase. So it would have been 2,502 or 25,200. And then we could fill in the percent equation, which is the amount equals the base times the percent. So we would have gotten 1,260 equals 25,200 times P. We would want to undo the multiplication of 25,200 and P, so we would divide. Well, 25,200 divided by itself is just 1. So I get my P by itself, and then notice here, this looks exactly like the formula. Okay, so this formula didn't come out of thin air. It really just came from this idea of solving for the percent. You take the amount and you divide it by the base. So we would get 0.05 when we did this division. And then we know that in the percent equation, we have to take our percent answer and convert it to a decimal. So we would get a 5% increase in population. So you get the same answer whether you use this formula or you use the equation. Know that the formula came from this idea that to find the percent, we take the amount and divide it by the base. Okay. Now, next up, we have an ice cream stand sold 6,000 ice cream cones last summer. This summer, the same stand sold 5,400 ice cream cones. What was the percent of decrease in the number of cones sold last summer to this summer? So let's first figure out the value of the decrease. So the decrease was, well, they originally sold 6,000 ice cream cones, but this summer they only sold 5,400. So that's going to be a difference of 600 cones. Okay. Now the original value, it says an ice cream cone sold 6,000 ice cream cones last year. This year they sold 5,400. What was the percent of increase in the number of cones sold from last summer? So that tells me that from last summer was the original. All right, so we get that the original value here was 6,000. Okay, so the percent of decrease is going to be 600 divided by 6,000. And then we would get a decimal that we have to convert to a percent. So you would have to multiply by 100 or move your decimal to the right twice. So a lot of times you'll see these formulas that just go ahead and have the multiply by 100. So let's see what we get. So if we go to the calculator, we need to take 600, divide it by 6,000, and then we can multiply by 100. That just moves the decimal to the right twice manually, or not manually, but the calculator does it for us. So we end up getting 10. So this tells me that we have 10%. So there was a 10% decrease in ice cream cone sales. And that's it. Now, I told you I would show you the percent proportion. So in this case, the amount is always going to be the value of the increase or the decrease. So the amount here is 600. The base is the original value, which we determined was the ice cream cones sold last summer. So it'd be 6,000. And remember, for the percent proportion, we have the amount over the base equals the percent over 100. So we would get 600 over 6,000 equals P times 100. Okay, and you can kind of see right here, these are the same because we're taking the amount, dividing it by the base. So we would cross multiply, and I would get 6,000 P equals 600 times 100. So 6,000 P equals 60,000. Divide by 6,000 on both sides. And we get that P equals 10%. So you're going to get the same thing if you do the percent proportion, percent equation, or if you use those formulas I gave you for this. Either one is fine. You don't have to do both. Just understand if you do the percent equation or the percent proportion, make sure you understand what is the base, what is the amount. All right. So there you have it. That is a nice introduction to problem solving with percents and then also doing percent of increase, percent of decrease. In the next section, we're going to talk about some other special types of percent problems, and they're going to be pretty easy, stuff that we're pretty familiar with already.